In this episode, I'm once again joined by John Myrdhin Reynolds, also known as Lama Vajranatha, writer, teacher, translator, and scholar practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism. John begins with the discussion about the unique characteristics of Dzogchen, common misunderstandings that have arisen from its widespread popularity, and the differences between Dzogchen, Mahāmudrā, and the kenshō of Zen. John also discusses his extensive field research into Himalayan Shamanism, spirit possession and rituals of exorcism, shamanic diagnosis and healing, and what it takes to become a shaman. John also explores the various classes of spirit, including Gyalpo spirits, who manifest as authoritarianism and sectarianism, recounts experiences of spirit attacks, and explains the differences between the shaman, lama, and magician. So without further ado, John Myrdhin Reynolds. John Myrdhin Reynolds, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so delighted to be talking with you again. And the last two episodes that we recorded together have been extremely well received and popular.
Really?
Oh yes, in the first one we discussed your life and academic career and also your career in Buddhism, or your trajectory, should we say, in Buddhism. And it was very fascinating indeed. And in the second episode, we talked about your experience in Western esotericism, becoming a third degree high Wiccan priest. And we had a fascinating discussion about comparing sadhana practice and the purposes of that and the mechanisms of that with evocation and invocation rituals found in Western esotericism. And that was really
out of the Key of Solomon, which was the text that Gerald Gardner used when constructing his basic Wiccan rite that he put in the Book of Shadows. Yeah.
And we had left some cliffhangers on that second episode. And
yes.
Those cliffhangers were, well, there were several of them. And one of the key ones was to do with exorcism and soul retrieval, and your research in Nepal into the techniques and the lore of Tibetan shamanism.
Yeah.
And so I would like to discuss that with you today. But first, I noticed on your website, vajranatha.com, that you have a seminar coming up. Now, the date is September 16th to 17th, 2023.
No, that's been changed. It's the end of the month, the 31st of September and the 1st of October.
Right.
Beginning at 3 o'clock Central European time, Saturday and Sunday.
Saturday and Sunday. And that seminar is called Dzogchen, Discovering Buddhahood Within Oneself.
Yes, and there the emphasis will not be so much talking about the background of Dzogchen or anything as academic as that, but mainly about how one practices and actually doing the practices. Of course, I draw on my initial experience with Dorje Rinpoche, who was my first Dzogchen master when I got to India in 1969, prehistoric times for some people.
I'm wondering if you might say something about the unique characteristics of Dzogchen, at least in the way you're going to be presenting it. I understand there's a range of presentations of Dzogchen.
Oh, yes.
So some people see it as a direct, dare I say, easy way. I've heard that kind of a thing. Oh, give me the Dzogchen. I don't want to do the sadhana. I don't want to do this ngundro and so on. Just give me the pointing out instructions and then I'll be initiated into the nature of mind or something like this. So one hears all these remarkable stories of Dzogchen pointing out instructions and immediate realization of the nature of mind and so on. So I'm wondering if you might say something about the unique characteristics of Dzogchen, and in particular in the context of what you'll be presenting at the end of September.
Yeah, well, you see, Dzogchen has sort of become now a fashion and a popular buzzword and so on, much like Zen was in the 1960s when I first got involved with Buddhism in America. And so many people are now claiming to teach Dzogchen and so on, whether they've had very much contact with it or not. but in general it was preserved in the two old schools of Tibet, that is the Nyingmapas and the Bonpos. And when I first got interested, there wasn't any information about this mysterious teaching called Dzogchen. And it wasn't until actually I met Dorje Rinpoche in India that I got direct introduction to it, what people are called pointing out instruction. The thing is, the ngondro that people are doing, this is not the introduction or the introductory practices of Dzogchen. This is for the Tantra system. And it's very useful because it gives you a sort of crash course in Buddhism from both the Sutra point of view and the Tantra point of view. But in order to get the Rigpa Ngotro, the direct introduction to the state of Dzogchen, or what some people are calling pointing out instructions, you have to be prepared for this. I had already for years been practicing meditation in the US with Dejang Rinpoche, Tartung Tulku, and so on. So Dorje Rinpoche recognized this, and so he didn't talk about the ngondro or anything. We began just with the semti, which are the mind teachings. And of course, there's exercises you do there, which I would present in the seminar and so on. But in order to get at the nature of mind, you have to first get at what is meant by mind. People use that term, that word all the time without thinking of what it means in terms of direct experience. They'll say my mind and things like this, like it's some sort of object or substance or something like this. So we have to actually get into the experience of this, and that's why meditation practice beforehand is so important. Otherwise, there's nothing to point out. It's just so many words. Because actually, Dzogchen is not a object, and it is not an intellectual teaching. It isn't actually something you can get from reading a book or taking a weekend seminar or something like this. It is actually a state of being which you must discover within yourself. And unless you discover, or first make the effort to discover who you are, it's just so much blah, blah, just so many words. And when you're living in words and so on, that's not Dzogchen. One of the most useful images here is that of the mirror. Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche always used that when explaining about Dzogchen, that in Dzogchen you find yourself in the condition of the mirror, not just in the condition of the reflections in the mirror. That means we find ourselves in the nature of mind rather than in the contents of the nature of mind, that is our thoughts and emotions and so on. It doesn't mean we're just a blank mind, there's no experience there, but our center of gravity has shifted, and we find ourselves in that condition. And yes, we can continue having experiences, but we are like being the mirror, and the reflections are appearing in the mirror. But if we haven't done any meditation practice before that, then so explanations are just words. So we have to come to an experiential understanding of this. And then, of course, Dzogchen comes to us in the context of the Tantra system. And as I was explaining last time, we have the Keirim, the visualization process, where we visualize ourselves as a Yidam meditation deity, sitting in the middle of its sacred space, the mandala palace or temple. And then we identify ourselves with that Yidam meditation deity, meditating upon it in order to access those qualities, powers, capacities, and wisdoms that are traditionally associated with it. But all that is not Dzogchen, that is the Keirim. But then there is also the question of how does the deity, the Yidam meditation deity, feel? And that's the next phase, which is known as Dzogchen, or the perfection process. And the central practice there is that of tummo, or what the Hindus call kundalini. You give rise to the psychic heat, which is the tummo. Well, it's not just heat, but it's also pleasurable sensation or bliss or ecstasy. And so you find yourself ultimately attaining the Mahāmudrā, where you are totally in the dimension of the meditation deity as the Yidam. And this is preparing us for the realization of the Rupakaya when we attain Buddhahood. But this lasts for the duration of our meditation practice, where we find ourselves temporarily in this virtual reality. But then we dissolve that visualization back into the state of shunyata, or emptiness, out of which it originally arose. And it's at that moment we have the opportunity to find ourselves in contemplation, or the state of Dzogchen. Now, it doesn't mean that's necessarily going to happen, but it provides that opportunity. And so then we distinguish in the sadhana practice these three phases of the Keirim, the Dzogchen, and finally the Dzogchen, because Chenpo can also mean not just great, but total. We find ourselves totally in Dzogpa, the perfect realization of being an enlightened being in the aspect of the Yidam. But then, of course, the ordinary sounds of and visions of mundane life then reemerge, and so then we find ourselves in Jetop, the subsequent realization there. So doing sadhana practice is one way to find yourself in Dzogchen, but it's not the only way. There are other ways. It doesn't mean then that everyone has to do these elaborate sadhanas in order to practice Dzogchen. And then people often asked also, including myself, when I first went to Darjeeling, about Mahāmudrā and Dzogchen. What's the difference? And the various lamas would say to me, Chakchen, Dzogchen, Chikpare, which means Mahāmudrā and Dzogchen are the same. And basically that's true. Now, the Mahāmudrā that we usually talk about comes to us through the Kajapa tradition, because it came at a later period in Tibet, the 11th century revival of monastic Buddhism in Tibet, whereas Dzogchen came earlier with Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra and Vairochana in the 8th century. And generally everyone knows Milarepa, the famous yogi, and so on. And finally, after being trained by Marpa, he retired to that cave in the mountains. And then the Kadampa monk Gampopa sought him out, and Milarepa gave him instruction, in particular in the 6 yogas of Naropa, which is basic Dzogchen practice. That is tummo, and then the auxiliary yogas with that. And he gave him instruction in Mahāmudrā. But before Milarepa had gone to Marpa, he had gone to learn magic from Nyingmapa Lama. And from that Nyingmapa Lama, he was also instructed in Dzogchen Semde, the mind series of teachings of Dzogchen. And he transmitted this to Gampopa. He simply called it Mahāmudrā. And so then that came down as a lineage. And when Kala Rinpoche was giving and he was a Kajupa Lama, Karma Kaju Lama, giving instruction on Mahāmudrā, I was totally amazed because it was exactly Dzogchen. So what these lamas were saying is true. And we also know from the criticisms of the great scholar, Sakya Pantida, who lived in the 12th century. He criticized Gampopa for, teaching this Mahāmudrā, where you didn't have to go through this tantric transformation practice first, because the other understanding of Mahāmudrā is when you find yourself totally in the identity and condition of the Yidam meditation deity. So within Tibetan Buddhism, there's various shades of meaning and disputes and so on, like this. But anyway, in those early days in Darjeeling, we had no problem doing Dzogchen and Mahāmudrā together. And so, as I say, there are various ways to find yourself in the state of Dzogchen. So just through ordinary Shine meditation, it's possible to develop there, and sometimes it can just happen spontaneously, like the Zen stories about people suddenly waking up and finding themselves in kenshō or something when they were sitting on the toilet or brushing their teeth or something like this. But Zen works much like this. It is also like Dzogchen and Mahāmudrā, it's Upadesha teaching. That is direct and rather private meditation instruction from a master to a single disciple, or at most a small group of disciples. But Zen differs in that it comes out of the sutra tradition, originally the Lankavatara Sutra. Later, the sixth patriarch emphasized the Vajrachaitaka Sutra, but originally the Lankavatara Sutra, but it's the same shunyata here that we have in Dzogchen and Mahāmudrā and Zen. But in Zen, Dzogchen and Mahāmudrā, there is more emphasis on the Nangwa, or the illumination side of experience. Whereas in Zen, you're told sort of just ignore this and focus on shunyata, the state of emptiness. So anyway, we get into some of the practical aspects of this from Dzogchen Sende and Dzogchen Longde. when we do this seminar at the end of the month.
Fascinating. Great. I wonder if there are any near enemies of Dzogchen. I'm thinking, for example, of
Yes.
a certain way of teaching Dzogchen and Mahāmudrā that involves a kind of hypnotic induction and then a pointing to that trance state as the nature of mind. I've seen that done in quite popular context, actually. Are there near enemies of Dzogchen? And if so, what might they be?
Well, there's always Lokdren, that is false teachers. Like the Western Jewish and Christian tradition, they speak about false prophets. So we also have this, that there's false teachings about Dzogchen and so on. But Dzogchen is not trance. Dzogchen is a state of total presence and alert awareness. Trance is not. Trance is an experience. Yes, there's many kinds of experiences, including mitokpa nyam, the experience of having no thoughts. If Dzogchen was simply no thoughts, then any cow in the pasture chewing on her cud is an enlightened being, a Buddha on 4 legs. But that's lungmaten, that is a dull state of mind. That is not Dzogchen. Trances are always dull states of mind. You can't induce a semi-hypnotic state and then tell somebody, oh, no, this is the nature of the mind. Now, in fact, if anybody says to you, oh, I am most of the time in the nature of mind, and they say this mainly to impress the girls who are at the retreat, you know for sure they're not, because if you're in the nature of mind, you're not talking. Talking is when the mind is working. The state of Dzogchen transcends the mind, it's beyond the mind, but it's not unconscious. It's totally present, alert, and aware. It has its own qualities. Now, how do you know you're in that state? Well, you don't. Because if you think you know something, you are in the state, you are in mind, you are in duality. So who knows Dzogchen? You don't know Dzogchen. Dzogchen knows itself. It's wrong self. It's self-illuminated. It's like you have the candle flame, which illuminates the dark room so you can see everything in it, but it also illuminates itself. So if you're in Dzogchen, the state of Dzogchen or Rigpa, intrinsic awareness, knows this. You don't know this like you're the subject here looking at an object. That's duality, that's the mind working. So in this sense, Dzogchen is beyond the mind, so then we speak of not sem, mind, but sem yi, the nature of mind.
Very interesting indeed. And speaking of trance,
yeah,
that is something associated, I think, with shamanism. And it's a word often associated with Himalayan shamanism. So perhaps this is a good segue into your research. Now, you've researched the techniques, as I mentioned before, of Tibetan shamanism, Himalayan shamanism, including rites of exorcism, soul retrieval, and so on, and presumably the oracular functions that are performed there too.
Yes, I was, because I went to Nepal to do research in the Nyingmapa tradition in particular. And so I wasn't then, although we had Tamang shamans in the village of Bodha when I was living there in the early days. I don't know, I think they've retreated somewhat from Bodha these days, which has become sort of a metropolis now. I mean, Kathmandu has expanded beyond the borders. It's changed more than any other place I've experienced in my life. When I first went there around 1969, I got on the airplane at Patna, and, we were going in a small plane. And when we got to Tribhuvan Airport, we had to circle around while they chased the cows off the landing field before we could come down. And we got out of it. It was just a small brick building at that time. And immigration was in that. And so passed through, and then I got a taxiwala, and we went out onto the ring road, which had been built a couple of years before by the Chinese, and we got to the intersection at Chabal, and then he stopped, and he refused to go down the hill to Bodha because the Kampa guerrillas were there, who during the summer would fight the Chinese in Tibet, and in the winter they would retire to Bodha and would get rearmed by the Americans and whatnot. And the taxiwalas were afraid of these Kampas running around with these weapons and so on. So I had to hike down still a dirt road. There was no electricity except in the police station. That was the only place. There were no toilets, no running water. You just went out in the field and that. No restaurant. So there was a kind Tibetan woman who was making vegetarian momos for the hippies and so on. This was primitive at this time, but one of the places to gather socially were the chongkongs. Bodha was famous for its chongkongs, or taverns, where you drank, traditional chong made from wheat or millet or whatever, mainly wheat at that time. But there was one just at the end of the village where the Tamang shamans would hang out. And they were collecting gossip about the Tamang community and so on, because they also serve as the psychotherapists and advisors and so on to their community. And in Nepal, shamanic practices have been very much integrated even with modern Western practices. So in the hospitals there, they have shamans on staff who can come in, because you get tribal peoples, gurus and manans and so on. And it helps when the two systems work together. Now, I got interested in shamanism because of my own background. I don't know if I mentioned this when we were talking about my personal life in that first podcast, but when I was 3 years old, I met the spirits for the first time, who rose out of the water and introduced themselves to me and so on, and explained to me that they lived beneath the earth in these jewel-like cities, and I should visit them and so on. So then I went out in the backyard and started digging a hole, and my mother got upset when she saw me disappear in a hole, called the neighbors. They pulled me out and asked me why I was doing this. And I said, well, I met these water spirits, which I later discovered are called Nagas in India. And I want to make contact with them. And then she told my father, who figured, must be dinosaurs. So he took me to the Paleontological Museum at Princeton University, took a dinosaur skeleton. I said, no, they're not that big. They're, human size and so on, even though they're green. And then later, when we moved to another part of New Jersey, we were just at the end of the suburbs and the forest began there. And I used to wander in there and so on. And I encountered various spirits associated with certain rock formations and the trees, what are called yakshas in India. But I very soon learned that it was unwise to speak about this in our American society, because either the Christians think you were hanging out with demons and devils and this sort of thing, or they thought you were going crazy and you needed a psychiatrist and the mental hospital and so on. So I just kept my mouth shut. And I didn't have any trouble, growing up in American society in that way, but occasionally I would have experiences that were quite different from them. So when I got involved with Tibetan Buddhism, of course, for the Tibetans, nature is filled with spirits, not only nature, but even our human communities and so on. So I was sensitive to this. And then I met some Namkhai Lamas who were specializing in going around to the various villages and dealing with the problems of spirit possession, or when spirits would cause diseases and other difficulties for people, and found, it's very much a living tradition among the Tibetans, and the shamans were Buddhist in religion. Now, of course, this can be different, say, for example, with the tribal people, like the Tamangs, who mix a lot of Hinduism in with this, and Shiva and so on, or the gurus, who some of them resent the Tibetan Lamas, because the Lamas are opposed to the practice of blood sacrifice. This is the main big difference, because both of them, both the tribal shaman and the Tibetan Lama, are dealing with these spirits, but they deal with it in a different way. The main Tibetan method is puja. You establish a personal relationship with the spirits in the other world, and then you communicate to them, and in particular communicate energy to them by way of making offerings, because the puja offerings are the embodiment of energy, because they are consecrated. They're not just the physical drinks and food, but through the consecration, the purification, consecration, energy has been projected into them, and the spirits receive this energy. And when you have given energy to them, then this is transactional and reciprocal. You can expect something in return from them. It may include worldly benefits and good health, prosperity, timely rains, things like this. And this is practiced at every Buddhist monastery, with the guardian pujas done around sunset, because the spirits become stronger when the sun begins to set, the sun being the symbol of ego and waking consciousness. And when that goes down below the horizon, then everything in our collective unconscious psyche begins to arise, and that includes the other world of the spirits. And so they have these dharmapala pujas, or puja offering ceremonies for the guardians. And there's two important considerations here. That first of all, the leading officiant, or the principal lama, does a ladrup, a meditation where he transforms himself into some powerful guru or yidam figure, for example, like Mahakala. And then when the spirits are summoned, they see Mahakala there, and so then they behave very respectfully and so on. Because the guardian spirits or dharmapalas, who are emanations of great bodhisattvas like Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, Vajrapani, etc. They are enlightened beings. So they are infinitely patient and infinitely compassionate. And even if you act like a jerk and screw everything up and so on, they're still totally patient and compassionate with you. They don't get angry. But in their retinue, there are many drekpa, which are lesser spirits who are a bit arrogant and temperamental and become easily irritated. And so they can cause problems. And so this is one reason that the officiant, the leading Lama, transforms himself into this powerful figure like Mahakala, who can then keep all these more rowdy spirits under control. The second important thing is you always have puja offerings for them, because these lesser spirits are like children. And they come to your door, like in Halloween in Great Britain, Canada, US, and they say trick or treat, which means you either give them a bribe, candies, and so on, or they can do some mischief, like soap your windows or let the air out of the tires on your car, things like this. Well, it's the same way with these lesser spirits. You give them a bribe. But in the Buddhist tradition, we don't make offerings of blood sacrifice. Now, in ancient India, this was done, particularly with the yakshas. The Nagas didn't like this. You always make white offerings to the Nagas, like milk and sweets and this kind of thing. I remember even when I was living at the Hindu ashram in South India, in Andhra Pradesh, every morning, the Hindu ladies would come out, and we had a Nagaputa, which was this mound. It was probably originally a termite mound, but there were passages that went to the underworld there, so they believed that the Nagas were down there, and they would make offerings of milk there. And then I remember my Irish grandmother telling me that in her youth, her family would leave offerings of milk outside the door for the Ishi, for the people of the Shi, because they believed that these spirits lived in the hollow hills of Ireland and so on. Very much like the Nagas, and also both groups, the Irish and the Indian, they like the color green and so on. So I saw them doing that. But the yakshas in ancient times, some of them were rather ferocious, and they liked to feed on blood sacrifice. Now, when you sacrifice an animal, and it was the same in India in those days, and then in pagan Europe, before Europe became Christian, and with the Greeks and Romans, you offer an animal and you kill it by slitting its throat and allowing the blood to flow out on a stone altar. And the spirits feed on the prana, the life force or energy, which flows out of the blood. The blood's a vehicle. For this, they don't actually feed on what we would call the material of the offering. And so the Buddhists came up with this method of the torma, which is a vegetarian substitute offering. You make this cake, and of course it becomes a form of Tibetan art. These torma cakes can be extremely elaborate with decorations and so on. And they're made of a vegetarian substance, and mainly Tibetans use tsampa, which is a roasted barley flour. Ancient India, they made it out of rice. And then when you are offering to these spirits, you paint it red with vegetable dye. And then you prepare the physical offering, and then first you cleanse it with Ram Yam Kam, invoking out of your heart chakra the wisdom fires. Then the wisdom winds, the wisdom fires burn away all the impurities on the offering. The wisdom winds, green in color, blow away all the ashes of the impurities, and then the white wisdom waters wash away any remaining purities. All right, that's the sanwa, the cleansing process. Then we have the jangwa, which is a purification, because you are seeing the offering still with your impure karmic vision, the normal way human beings see them. So you temporarily you close your eyes, which invokes the sensation of the experience of the state of shunyata, or pure potentiality. And then you visualize this torma as not what you actually have there, whether you've made it yourself or you bought it at the bakery, as this magnificent torma cake, more sumptuous than a big wedding cake. And then that is its purification. And then you do the Chinlap, that is invoking the higher spiritual energies from a higher source to descend and enter into the torma cake. This is what was called by the Greeks theurgy, working with the energy of the gods. You summon it down from heaven and there. Well, in tribal societies, yes, you summon the higher energies from heaven and enter in, like the ancient Greeks and Romans did. The Buddhists understand that heaven, or the sky up there, is the symbol of the collective enlightenment of the Buddhas of the three times, of past, present, and future. And so you invoke those energies of body, speech, and mind with the mantra Om Ahum, and they descend and enter into your torma cake. And then you are ready to summon the spirits, and you offer it to them. And then you see them circle around it, and their tongues become like straws and go into it and draw out the energy that is in the cake, which makes them happy, and they feel satisfied and well disposed towards you or your congregation. And then you can ask them what you charge them what to do then. Because you've given energy to them, you can expect energy from them. Well, with tribal shamans, such as the gurungs, they felt, no, the spirits aren't going to be fooled by this. You have to actually offer them the blood from a live animal. So there is this argument in the or debate in the Himalayas between the Lamas and the traditional shamans about how you make these offerings to the spirits. But the same thing, if you did do a marcha, which means a blood offering, again, you would then ask what you want from these spirits, help me find what I have lost, or bring me prosperity or good health, etc., like this. So this is a principle we find everywhere in the world, also in religion, whether you light candles for saints or Maria or so on and pray to them, then you can ask them for help. But doesn't always work, and sometimes the spirits can be recalcitrant and difficult and still cause troubles. So this is why at the conclusion, the officiating Lama holds up a vajra, or even better, a purba, that is a three-bladed dagger, and shows this to the spirits, and manifesting himself as a powerful figure like Guru Rinpoche or Mahakala, and says, if you don't be satisfied and now depart and go off to your own place and don't return and cause us problems, we are going to crush your head into dust, and so on. Well, in order to threaten the spirits like that, you have to have the capacity to hold that visualization that strongly. Otherwise, they'll just look at you and laugh and say, who's this guy, you know? And even if you're not threatening, they might get irritated. They say, who's this guy? Why is he calling us? Why is he bothering us, you know? So you have to know what you're doing here. Now, mainly, main function of shamans is that of healing, and also these Ngakpas who go around to the villages, like several I worked with in Nepal, and they were Nyingmapa in terms of religion. It's not, among the Tibetan, shamanism is not a separate religion. But some places like the Gurus, or even in Mongolia, because Mongolia converted to Buddhism much later. First, there was the time of the Yuan dynasty with the descendants of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, and so on. All right, but not everybody actually became Buddhist. And then when that dynasty collapsed, a lot of people just continue with their shamanic activity and evoking the old spirits. And then there was a revival of monastic Buddhism in the 17th and 18th century, bringing again lamas from Tibet to Mongolia, and young Mongols going to Tibet to study at Drepung and other big monasteries. Well, the Gelugpas there's a difference there with them and the Nyingmapas. The Nyingmapas are much more integrated with the old shamanic culture that existed in pre-Buddhist days, whereas the Gelugpas are much more, a little bit like the Christians, you know, no, that is all heretical and so on. We don't want to be part of that, even though they do, you know, shamanic practices by invoking the guardians, and there's Paul and Lama and the rest of them, and Mahakala, as I was explaining before. So in Mongolia, shamanism is still like a separate religion. And then they feel attacked and persecuted by the Gelugpa Buddhists. And one time we had a program in Austria. It was in relation to the Dalai Lama coming and doing the Kala Chakra empowerment and so on, where lots of people showed up. But then we had a separate program after that in Himalayan Shamanism. We had one lady from Buryatia in Siberia, and she was talking about problems they were having with sectarian Buddhists who were trying to persecute the shamans and so on. But my own experience was that like with the Tamang shamans, you could have Buddhism and shamanism totally side by side, and the Buddhists were not objecting to you relating to the spirits. It's not like Christianity and Judaism, where there's only one God and you can't know. All the gods are out there as spirits and so on. But what the Buddhists object to is the sacrificing of animals. And you can see that in October when there's Durga Puja, for Kali in her various forms, and the Hindus, they sacrifice animals, and when they try to do that at a stupa, then they can get in fistfights with Tibetans and so on. So that's the big conflict. It's not theological, rather it's in terms of whether you practice blood sacrifice or not. Now, when shamans do the healing practice, yes, they do enter into trance or an altered state of reality, or they can. Some of them may fake it but like Dolkar, she was a chlaba or a shaman from lady shaman from Ladakh, and she worked for some time in Bodh in Nepal, and I saw her working there, and she was very effective. She would do chanting and drumming, and assisted by her husband, who would also do the drum. Because when the shaman goes into trance, he or she loses their usual motor ability, so they can't keep singing, and they experience their namkhai, or their consciousness, leaving their body. It sort of enters into something somewhat, let's describe, like a rainbow tube. Now, on the altar of the shaman, you have 3 mirrors placed there, which symbolize the 3 different existences. That of the devas, or, well, use the Tibetan term, Hla, the Hla in the sky, in the heavens above, and then the Lu, which means the Nagas in the worlds below and in the water element. And then for in between, you have the 3rd mirror, which represents the Zen, or in the old Gampopa terminology, they were called Nyen, but now they mainly use the term Zen, earth spirits. So you have the sky spirits, the underworld spirits, and the earth spirits, and the consciousness of the shaman leaves the body and goes through one of those gateways. And then the spirit guide of the shaman, which in Ladakh is called the Hla, but in central Tibet called a Pawo, enters into the body of the shaman, taking possession of it, and then speaks through the shaman. Now, that is not the state of Dzogchen. Anyway, in that condition, the spirit has insight into what first causes the disease, and sometimes this takes the form of a dialogue or question and answers, and with the assistant to the shaman asking the questions. And it may be the case that some spirit has become offended with that person, and therefore has affected their energy, because the spirits, being energy beings, can vibrate and resonate with our own personal energy field, which is correlated with our immune system. And so they can induce a sickness, an illness, or weakness, so an illness manifests. And so the first thing is to locate if there is a spirit which is the particular cause of this particular affliction. Now, even before the shaman does the trance, the shaman will do certain divinations and also tra, which means scrying. That means gazing into a mirror. If he's skilled with tra, he may get a vision of the offended spirit and so on, which then facilitates contact with that spirit. But anyway, at the second phase then is how to bring about a cure for this illness. Now, a lot of people have buron, which means karmic debts, and these incur lechak, or karmic retribution. This is a very shamanic concept, because when they brought Buddhism into Tibet, they spoke about your karma more in impersonal terms, whereas lechak, or karmic retribution, is very personal. Now, in your previous life, you have caused suffering to, or injured, or killed many living beings, either as a hunter to eat them, as a farmer, or a cattle herder or nomad, to feed on the flesh, or in battle against the human beings. Now, of course, most spirits have gone on to other lifetimes, but some have not. And then when they see you, they recognize you who did harm to them in a previous life. And this brings then lenchak, or karmic retribution. They can cause you problems in terms of events, or they can cause you illness. So the shaman is diagnosing this and then makes a prescription. You can do a lenchak puja, where you make offerings specifically to that spirit, and you apologize to them for what you've done in a previous life, and please accept this offering as compensation for what I've done to you in the past. It's like in tribal societies where you have blood money. Somebody in your clan has killed somebody in another clan. Okay, this could bring about a feud where the two clans, like in Scotland, where the two clans feud for generations. Or you can make some sort of offering or payment, for that. And then this reestablishes a harmony again. So that then becomes possible. But there are other rituals can be done of offering a substitute for this, for a person. And you may do this on other occasions, which where there isn't a attack, especially by a spirit, but you have a problem with tummo, or wandering spirits, who haven't taken up an incarnation yet, or some that are shidak, who remain tied to a specific location. Now, some of them may become a type of spirit known as a yidak or preta, which is what we usually call in the West a ghost that causes a haunting. And we had an experience in Seattle when I was a university student with that, where this Tibetan family purchased a house, and they suddenly started having these poltergeist experiences, and noisy ghosts, things crashing on the floor and all this. And they brought in our Lama, Dejang Rinpoche, who did some meditations and some divinations and that, and determined that this was a yidak, the preta, or a hungry ghost. That is the spirit of somebody who had died previously in that house and hadn't been able to let go of that attachment and so on. And so he prescribed making a dur. A dur is an elaborate ransom offering. It looks like a kind of wooden structure, and inside you have various things that symbolize the people in the house and all this kind of thing. And he did that in the ceremony that goes with it. And then at the conclusion, just before dawn, he took this out into the to the crossroads, and when the rays of the sun would strike the dirt, the spirit would be liberated, but it couldn't find its way back to the house which had imprisoned it. And so then it's liberated to wander off into the bardo and to seek a new birth. So they are these battery of rituals coming out of both the Buddhist Indian tradition and the earlier shamanic and Gampopa traditions of Tibet. And so you have these ransom rites like De or Lu and so on. And then there's collections of these rites that have been made by Mipam and other learned lamas and so on, and I've seen them performed. And similarly, if there is a spirit possession affliction, then one would do such rituals as a laguk to recall the soul, because there's a Tibetan understanding of the soul, which is a bit different than the Indian, and comes out of the shamanic tradition. And they speak of the soul as the La, but that's spelled differently than Hla. Hla means a god or a spirit. La means the soul. And the soul is not your namshe, it's not your consciousness, it's not your prana life force. Rather, it's a type of energy which is the energetic basis for your emotional life. Someone who has suffered soul loss, they manifest various symptoms, in particular chronic depression, a lack of energy, a lack of enthusiasm for life, and so on. These are symptoms of soul loss. And that can be caused by various things, especially alcoholism, drug addiction, things like this. And so the Lama can do a ritual, these various methods of laguk to summon again the soul. And when I saw Lopen Tenzing Namdak did this, he had this large brass bowl, and in it there was a mixture of milk and water, and so it clouded it. You couldn't see down into it. And on another plate that floated on top, he made a laluk, which is a soul sheep. It's an image of a sheep. And then everything is purified and empowered then in the ritual and the meditation. And then visualizes the fragments of the soul being reintegrated and returning to the soul sheep. And a sign that the ritual is working is when spontaneously the soul sheep turns around and looks at the practitioner who is sitting there with the Lama. And these are very ancient rituals that were done before Buddhism came to Tibet, but now they've been incorporated into Buddhism and so on, and then often attributed to Padmasambhava, who actually got on quite well with the shamans. And so in the Nyingmapa tradition, it's very much like this, whereas with the newer traditions, the Sarmapas, the later schools, they tend to feel that, oh no, we have what comes from India is pure, and all this other stuff, is kind of not a bit of a Christian attitude. But in Tibetan Buddhism, it's very flexible. Individual lamas all take their own position. So you even have Gyalpo lamas who are doing Padmasambhava practice, or His Holiness the Dalai Lama doing Dzogchen practice, and so on. It's not like we tend to think in the West, this sharp division between, all right, we are our own particular version of Christianity is the ultimate and the only true way, and everybody else is heresy or paganism or something like this. It isn't that way at all. So I was researching this when I was also in Dorje, besides High Tantra and Buddhist philosophy and so on.
How does one become a shaman in these particular cultures? I understand that there can be a familial aspect to it, but also I understand that in many shamanic traditions there can be a calling of a shaman through perhaps a shamanic sickness or some other means. So I'm wondering, how does one become a shaman in these kinds of contexts that you're discussing here?
Well, in traditional cultures, unlike nowadays, where people might want to become a shaman and then take a workshop and read some books and go to a Michael Harner class, etc., they don't want to become shamans, generally. The spirits call them. The spirits decide, we want that person. Now, they may be a descendant of a shaman, maybe their father was grandfather, grandmother, or something like this, or in their ancestry. But when the spirits call them, then they get this shamanic illness and go a little crazy and so on. And when they come out of that, they need to be trained how to do shamanism by a traditional shaman who will teach them various songs and rituals and this kind of thing. And so you become a shaman when you develop the vocation for it and are summoned for the spirit. With Buddhist lamas, it's more or less that you show that indication. You don't necessarily fall ill, but like one lama I worked with from Kalimpong, his father also, he was a ngakpa, but not someone who was in some big monastery or something, but he'd go to the villages and so on. And his son showed a capacity for dealing with the spirit and trained him and in the various ritual and meditation practices. And so then he became a shaman. So it can happen that way among Buddhist practitioners, but it can also happen when the spirits just decide to grab somebody and then you become a shaman, which is a way of being cured. It says our battery is running low. You might have to plug in the... Oh, you were saying?
Well, what is the status of shamans in those cultures? And I'm asking that question because I'm also wondering, you mentioned that people today would like to become a shaman and
that's here in the West, yes.
Right, go to workshops and so on and do trainings, and often that involves
and then really began with the books of Carlos Castaneda and people thinking what he was talking about Don Juan and so on in shamanism. But Don Juan is not a shaman. He's a magician, a sorcerer. He's doing magic. But the main function of the shaman is healing. That's not what Don Juan was doing. But anyway, this got people very interested in shamanism then. So it sort of ended up every time you turned over a rock in California, you'd find a shaman.
What do you think of that? Are they really shamans? Are they really able to do those things? Or if not,
Oh,
what is it they're
yes. I
doing?
mean, traditional shamans are definitely able to do that. Whether Westerners who are calling themselves shamans, that's something else again. But some of them were like Edgar Cayce. I mean, he was really a Western shaman. He would go into trance and get possessed by his spirit guide, who said he had been in a previous life some doctor. But anyway, he was very effective in diagnosing diseases and so on. So this is perfectly possible in our own culture.
What's the distinction you've made there between magician and shaman?
A traditional shaman gets possessed by a spirit guide. Now, of course, he may also do a kind of projection of consciousness too. Mircea Eliade wrote about this in his big book on shamanism, and he felt that the soul travel was the original form of shamanism, and spirit possession represented a later degeneration. But actually, they go together, as I was saying before, with the consciousness of the shaman exiting his normal body and the spirit guide then taking possession of him, and that spirit guide being quite a separate personality and also having certain capacity, psychic powers, and so on. And when you see this occur, you see there is this radical change. It's not the same personality in there. Now, maybe you could explain this by saying, oh, well, there's multiple personalities, blah, blah. But the spirit guide exhibits certain capacities which you don't see in the accounts I've read of multiple personalities here in the West. Now, a lama or a magician doesn't get totally possessed by a spirit. He retains his or her identity, but is able, through the development of their innate magical power, which you get through the practice of sadhana and mantra japa and so on, to then command the spirits. Like our Western image is that of King Solomon. He received the book of Raziel, which had been presented by the angel Raziel, the angel of mysteries, to Adam after he'd been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And in there was contained the secret names of all the angels and spirits and so on. And by virtue of knowing their secret names, then Solomon could invoke or evoke them and then command them, charge them with certain tasks, mainly building his temple there in Jerusalem. So he's represents an archetypal magician then in our Western tradition. So that's why when we're doing guardian practice or sangma in the Tibetan tradition, we transform ourselves into a yidam, which invites a type of possession of the spirit that descends, the yeshe wapa, where the energy descends into us, but we don't lose our identity. We don't fall into a trance or become a different personality. We retain our sense of identity, but then we can invoke our mantric powers to bring about changes in our environment or to command the spirits to do this or that. So the magician then retains their sense of identity and are able to charge the spirits, whereas the shaman then falls into a trance and is possessed by a spirit guide who then works through them, and that's the difference.
I wonder, given your capacities and openness, you would say, towards the spirit encounters, that you have discussed that in the previous episodes, actually, and you touched on it briefly here today. When you entered into that milieu of Himalayan shamanism, was that recognized by the shamans, and what did you have any interesting discussions with them about that, or are there any interesting anecdotes? Did they advise you at all or involve you at all due to your capacities? So that's one part, and the other part is your Western occult training. Did that play into your time in Himalaya with the Himalayan shamans? Was that relevant at all? Did that come into play?
Well, I mean, it was part of my background, and then I could see the interrelations with them. We didn't have any theoretical discussions as we might have in the West, whether this is just subjective experience or this is just projection and so on. As you could hear in the West, where they'll come out with so-called scientific explanations of things, because we have certain models that have developed very, very much when we neglected Aristotle, and we developed the mechanistic view of the world in the 17th century, which has only increased since then. And so there's many anomalies which do not fit in this model, and I am not put off by anomalies also, but I'm not naive either, that sometimes people's fantasies take on total reality to them, or some people can become schizophrenic and so on, and they are not in control of their experiences and so on. But I found training with Buddha's Lamas to be very effective in keeping my own balance and sense of humor about life.
This has been a very fascinating discussion indeed. Thank you. I wonder if there's anything more to say that we ought to mention about this topic of shamanism, of dawn provocation and La retrieval and this sort of thing. Anything else that I haven't asked you about, or that ought to be said or could be said?
Well, in terms of my own practice, I continue in communication with what I call my Dakinis, and they on occasion give me advice about what is happening in the world, which is one reason I've ended up over here in Europe rather than staying in the US. But also in Buddhist groups, there's been a lot of concern about Gyalpo spirits becoming stronger and stronger and manifesting as authoritarianism, sectarianism, all this kind of thing. And originally, Gyalpos were conceived of as being the spirits of humans who were very either warriors or priests, generally, who were very powerful in their previous life. And when they have entered into their spirit existence, they have kept many of their capacities. And so then they can cause a great deal of trouble, in particular in relation to Dzogchen. There have been concerns about this spirit called Dorje Shugden. He's gotten into the news in the past and so on. And he was originally trained as a geisha at the time of the fifth Dalai Lama, and that he'd been recognized as one of the leading candidates to be what became the fifth Dalai Lama, but he was passed over, and this other child was selected, who came from a Namkhai family. Well, he became a Trepung, a very brilliant geshe, an expert in debate and so on, and very much opposed to Dzogchen in particular, as an enemy of this, claiming that Dzogchen represents not a Buddhist teaching, but a Gampopa teaching, or even worse, a Chan teaching coming from China. And that's even a bigger insult to say you're practicing Zen than to say practicing Bon. Anyway, as a brilliant debater, he made many enemies, and they decided to get rid of him. But it is against the Vinaya for the monks to shed the blood of a monk. So the other geisha sat on top of him and shoved kata or scarves into his mouth until he died from asphyxiation. And then they threw his body in the Kichu River, and the legend is it came down and came ashore on the estate of his family and was discovered by his mother, who begged him to come back and take vengeance on his enemies. So he began causing a lot of trouble. And so the fifth Dalai Lama, called on the help of Sakya Trinsen, the head of the Sakya sect, because they're very skillful in handling these difficult Gyalpo spirits, and they subdued him, and he was imprisoned in a bottle. And it said that the Dalai Lama kept this in his chursham, in his private quarters in the Potala Palace. But then after he died, some monks came into his room and either deliberately or just out of curiosity released this Gyalpo spirit from its imprisonment, and he escaped. And then he remained a very minor guardian figure within the Gelugpa pantheon until the end of the 19th century, when the great Lama Pawangkapa decided to resurrect his cult, and did this and tacked on an empowerment for Shugden onto the Dorje Shugden, the Dorje Jikje practice. That's a very wrathful form of Manjushri. And so put it on there, and then gave that empowerment to all his disciples and so on. And among certain lines of Gelugpa, that has continued to be the practice until today. But if you then practice Dzogchen, the Shugden can make you ill and cause you many problems. And this, it is said, happened with the present Dalai Lama. And when he was taken very ill, the government in Dharamsala went to the Nechung oracle. Now, normally, the Nechung oracle becomes possessed by the spirit Pehar. Behar was originally a Turkish god, but was invited to Tibet by Padmasambhava to become a protective spirit for Samye Monastery, because the original Naga who was living there didn't want to do this. So anyway, Behar. So normally the Necho was a small Nyingmapa monastery adjacent to Samye. And then with the exile, it's now been resurrected in Dharamsala. And so they went to the Necho oracle there. And he went into trance, but instead of Behar manifesting in him and speaking through him, Palden Lama, the great female guardian, manifested. And she said the whole problem is that that Shugden is angry because the Dalai Lama took instruction in Dzogchen practice and is doing this so that he must discontinue all of the Dorje Shugden and Shugden practice he had gotten from one of his tutors, Trijang Rinpoche, who was a disciple of Pawankapa. And so I remember I was living in Bodha when this happened, and they set up certain pavilions there, and the Tibetans were doing mantra japa, recitation of mantra 24/7, there. And within 2 weeks, this cleared up the Dalai Lama's illness and all this. But there continued to be other incidents that a Gyalpo fundamentalist group grew out of this and later became headed by Geshe Kelsang in Great Britain, and they have split from the Dalai Lama. It's brought about this political split. So some of the lamas on Kelsang's side, Kelsang built a Shugden shrine right in the middle of his place in Cumbria. And this because I know somebody who'd been there and seen all that and so on. And it was often felt that some of the attacks on Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche were due to this Gyalpo, who doesn't want to see Dzogchen teachings, which he regards as heretical, spread in the West. So this is a very different way of looking at things than we're used to in Western political science. So this goes on in the Tibetan world. Anyway, I avoided contact with these spirits. So although I've met Trijang Rinpoche and was impressed by his presence and power and so on, and other lamas in his lineage like Dzong Rinpoche. And so I've never taken any transmissions on that side, only from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his senior tutor, Ling Rinpoche, which is quite different.
So it seems that taking certain empowerments can have certain consequences. And also, it's said breaking an empowerment or discontinuing practice of an empowerment that one has received can also have consequences. Is that in the same category as what you've just described with Shugden, upsetting or breaking faith with some spirit or so that one's connected to via the empowerment? Is that how that works? I
mean, we had one retreat with Namkhai Norbu in the US where we were attacked by this Gyalpo, but it was kind of indirect. It was through a woman, an American woman who had gone to, as a Dharma practitioner, gone to Nepal, gone to the Gyalpo monastery and got this empowerment and didn't realize she had received Shugden as part of it. And then she came to our Dzogchen retreat, and there were definite negative manifestations, and Namkhai Norbu recognized it immediately, stopped the retreat, and then we did for 2-3 days just ekadzati, a practice, ekadzati being a principal female guardian of the Dzogchen teachings. And we just did that, and it dissolved all the negative energy which had manifested. I mean, you saw people beginning to attack each other and so on, just completely out of context, you know. It was palpable. But then it eliminated this, but the poor woman, she couldn't stay. She had just gotten too sick, and she, you know, left the retreat. So on occasion, you experience these things. And I mean, most of the time with the Westerners, if they receive empowerments, or they're not strict dhammsik or samaya vows, you know, to do the practice and so on. A lot of Westerners are very much active in what Trungpa Rinpoche called the spiritual supermarket, because we have all kinds of new age things, and you can get involved in things, and they have their social dimensions, and maybe one's girlfriend is involved with, or one's boyfriend, this and that. So people shift around. So most of the time, there's no problem here that they, especially if one just generally stays with the Dharma and so on. There's no negative consequences. It's generally, say, even taking some of the very important big initiations like Kala Chakra and so on. Basically, for most people, it's just chinlap. It's just blessing. You get the spiritual energy, and okay, you feel good for a time, and then no negative consequences coming from it. And this is in line with Buddhism in general. You know, the Buddha is infinitely compassionate. He's not aiming to damn our souls for hell and after a judgment or something like this. They're just aiming to help us evolve spiritually as best we can, but it requires our own effort, because he's just pointing the way. He's not actually taking us there. You know, he's not a bus driver or something. So you don't get on the Nirvana bus and he takes you there.
Okay, my last question then. Why did you move from the USA to Europe then? You said this was under the direction of, or the advice of your dakinis. Why did you do that?
Actually, I never felt I had deep karma in North America. I didn't feel I'd ever been, Native American. A lot of people from the U.S. have, I mean, if they get into spirituality, they feel that way. I never felt I had been there. This is my first time, but when I first came to Europe, wow. And of course it was Greece first, and then Italy, and then toward Northern Europe. I really felt a karmic connection, and that just stayed with me. And for various reasons, well, mainly, I had run out of money and had been expelled, got my quit India notice from Indira Gandhi, so I had to leave and go back to the U.S. Okay, but there was always, I felt that vibration, that connection. And when it developed that I met the lady who became my third wife, who was from Denmark, that was the excuse to move back to Europe, and so I did. And of course, then Denmark had this wonderful social system with its national health and all that, where we didn't have anything like that in the US. So. And then I just stayed in Europe and moved to Germany. later Poland, and now Budapest. But I continue to visit the US and have many friends and connections there and so on.
And actively teaching also. You have Dzogchen, Discovering Buddhahood Within Oneself, the last weekend of September, coming up quite soon, and that's online. And I understand you also teach in person and so on, and this information's at vajranatha.com and on your Facebook page. And you were mentioning to me before that people can also, you're open to people contacting you directly at your email address. Should we share that here?
Yes, that's vajranatha@hotmail.com. I mean, that's prehistoric, so it's still Hotmail. It didn't become whatever Word or Microsoft is done with it. Outlook, I think they call it now. But anyway, I didn't want to change it. I just kept it. But because, as I said, on the fan page, that's mostly technical questions regarding the seminar, what time and payment and blah, 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 like that. And I have an administrator who takes care of that kind of thing. But I use the personal email account if people have serious Dharma questions. I mean, some people, and I found it very much in Poland, because Poland is very much under the shadow of the Catholic Church, and so you're not supposed to question anything, ask any questions of the priest or anything. So it's the same way with the Polish Buddhists, you just have to sit there and be quiet, and the Lama does anything and you can't ask any questions. No, I mean, I'm from America. We're used to asking questions and so on. I mean, of course, in the past, I never did get a straight answer about what the Holy Spirit is, or the Heilige Geist, or the Holy Ghost, or whatever you call it. Or whether God comes in three parts. It was all very mysteriously to me, and still until I actually started doing research on the Nicene Creed and all those debates from the time of the Emperor Constantine and afterwards, etc. Anyway, but that's part of the history of Christianity. But people shouldn't be afraid to ask questions about the Dharma. I mean, happened in the time of the Buddha, because the Buddha just wasn't giving lectures and then walking off. Well, a lot of it was question and answer and discussion, and not so much debate. Nobody's trying to win an argument against the Buddha, but to help clarify things. And how is this meaningful in terms of your own personal experience? Because I say the Buddha was just pointing the way, but the practitioner has to put in the effort to travel the path. And so then it's important what you're doing, and what alternatives are there, what materials and methods are there, and so on. Because Tibetan Buddhism comes to us from outside Europe. It's a lot of people perceive as an exotic culture in Tibet. I feel very comfortable in Tibetan culture. I don't have any problem with that, but some people may be perceived as saying, "Oh, you Tibetan Buddhists, you worship demons," and so on. In order to transform negative energies, then the Yidam manifests in a wrathful and energetic form, but at heart is totally calm and compassionate, may look fierce on the outside, like a Vajrakilaya or something, but this is all part of the skillful means of the Dharma, because the Dharma is not just wisdom, it's also skillful means. That it isn't enough just to have the correct view talking to somebody, but you also have to present it skillfully, because otherwise you can totally destroy what you're trying to say to them. So I see my seminars as educational that way, letting people know who are interested what is available there. So, and I just do this.
What a wonderful opportunity there. The last weekend of September, Dzogchen Discovering Buddhahood Within Oneself.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful. Lama Vajranatha, thank you very much.
A pleasure. See you again.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.